Hey, good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, E.J. Antoni joins us this hour. He talks the economy with us. He testified before Elizabeth Warren Wednesday. Hilarious. Can't wait to talk to him about that experience. Does she really look like Pocahontas? Kurt Schlichter will be here. We talked to him at 5 o'clock. And then at 5:30 from the Trump campaign, Lynn Patton stops by. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I do have to say my favorite feature of the last 24 hours is the left just raging over Donald Trump hosting a rally in New York. Kathy Hochul, the awful governor of that state, was on CNN yesterday. And once again, if you see people show up to a Trump rally, it's because Americans suck. The voters suck. They are clowns. Here's the governor of New York.
Well, I'll tell you, it won't make a difference at all, Jake, and that is for Donald Trump to be the ringleader of and invite all his clowns to a place like the Bronx. New York will never...
These are her constituents. I want to emphasize this point. I don't think it could be emphasized enough. This is the Bronx. These are New York State residents. Here you have the governor of New York saying these are nothing but clowns.
Place like the Bronx. New York will never, ever support Donald Trump for president. We know him better than anyone, and that means we understand what he's all about is just for himself. So this state will go solidly behind Joe Biden for president, as it has in the past. So if he wants to spend his time doing these made-up fake rallies and pretending they're support here, be my guest, because while you're doing that... Donald Trump.
You're not actually supporting Trump. You're a fraud. You're a clown.
Biden's out there on the other side, making sure he's delivering for all Americans.
Yeah, and that guy's wildly popular.
And so go ahead, spend all your time you want in New York, because we'll be with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's out there winning over the rest of the battleground states.
What an awful human being. What an awful, again, another woman who should be nowhere near power. These people, these tyrants. Here we go. Let's see. I've got President Trump yesterday. Oh, this is a funny moment. This is you heard Sam in Alexandria reference a moment ago, a man by the name of Ruben Diaz. Ruben Diaz is a former New York City councilman. He's a Democrat, and he announced yesterday that he's endorsing President Trump. And he apologized for other Hispanics who are, trying to wreck the country, like, Juan Merchan, the guy who's allowing his courtroom in New York to be rigged against the American voter. Yeah. Here is President Trump yesterday. This clip starts in a really funny way. Trump asks the crowd, hey, would you like me to list off all of the congressmen who are here? And the crowd yells, no.
Would anybody like to hear these congressmen's names on it? But I do have to mention a few people. We're truly honored to be joined by a man who is a Democrat and a former member of the New York City Council, and he's been a friend of mine, and he helped me very much with the Ferry Point project and getting it working, and did a really good job. Ruben Diaz Sr. Come on up, Ruben. Good.
Here comes Ruben.
Good. Please.
Thank you. Mr. President, I am a Puerto Rican, a black Puerto Rican. I used to be a state senator for 15 years. And I used to be city council member. Today I'm here for various reasons.
For various
But
reasons?
I want to tell you first that as a Puerto Rican, as a Hispanic, I want to apologize to you.
As a Puerto Rican, as an Hispanic, I want to apologize to you
For the conduct of Judge Juan Merchan. As a Hispanic, I want to apologize.
President Trump goes, thank you so much. He says, thank you. He looks touched by this. As this gentleman says, I want to apologize for Judge Juan Merchan.
He's been used. He has been used to destroy you. But we know better than that. We know better than that. As a minister, president of the New York Hispanic Clergy Organization, I want to tell AOC.
AOC.
This morning, she intended to become a prophet. And she said, even God doesn't want Trump in the Bronx because it's going to rain.
Yeah, there was some rain yesterday morning, I guess, in the Bronx, and it was a bit muddy yesterday. AOC was very excited about this because she was hoping that voters who disagreed with her wouldn't assemble and get together in a rally. So she said that, even God doesn't want Trump in the Bronx. And it turns out it was totally fine. The weather held up perfectly fine. There was no rain. They were able to get everybody together, tens of thousands of people. And here's what this gentleman had to say.
Madam Prophet AOC, you have become a false prophet.
AOC is a false prophet, he says. She's a false prophet. So the crowd really excited about that. President Trump very excited to have his endorsement, which comes right here.
Look at what a beautiful day. That means that not only you guys want Trump in the Bronx, because if we're going to measure that for the weather, then I would say humbly that even God wants you in the Bronx.
He said even God wants you in the Bronx based on the weather.
And I want to close by saying, Mr. President, I want to join you in having the Bronx great again. Please accept this Democrat, this black Puerto Rican with a kinky hair and a broken English. Please accept my endorsement for you as a president. Thank you very much.
There he is. They hold their hands up together. Like Trump just won a boxing match. Yeah, it's pretty funny. And he said, what did he say? He said, please accept this endorsement from a black Puerto Rican. He rolls that R really nicely, doesn't he? With the kinky hair, he said, and broken English. Please accept my endorsement. The two raising their hands in victory together on that stage, and the crowd very excited about all of that. So that was cool to see. Yesterday, I've got Jay in Arlington calling in now on line 2. Jay, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yes, far be it from me to give advice to the former president, but what I would love to see is for him to go back to the Bronx, into the backyard of the false prophet of the Bronx, along with all the Bronxians, or whatever they're called, from yesterday, and hold a rally in her front yard. If not in her front yard, then in her street, to show people the different part of the Bronx that she is claiming to be from.
I know. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, right in front of her district office would be good. Just like set up
exactly.
right there
Exactly.
and see what happens. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, she was really against all of this, of course, because she hates him and she's not a big fan of America. So she's
And
opposed
she's
to
not
seeing
really
him
from
succeed.
the Bronx.
Yeah, no, she's not. Where's she from again? She's from some rich suburb, Westchester.
She's from a rich, I don't know if it was Westchester, and then the part of the Bronx that she claims to have grown up in is very different than the part of the Bronx that President Trump was at yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be helpful for the voters of the Bronx to see where she claims to have come from.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Good old Sandy. Thank you very much. That's a good idea, Jay. We'll see what happens. We do have a representative for the Trump campaign, Lynn Patton, joining us coming up at 5:30. We can get into more of the details here on what exactly is going on with the Trump campaign and how much success they're having. I do wonder what's going to happen next week. The jury returns to deliberate. They're going to have those closing arguments on Tuesday. after Memorial Day. And the jury's set to deliberate, and I'm guessing we're going to have a verdict of some kind in this hack trial coming up later in the week, next week. What's going to happen? What's going to happen if they convict? You know, what'll that news cycle look like? And more importantly, what impact will it have on America? I do think that the impact is that they're just martyring the guy. If the rest of the trial has been any indication, this is only going to go Trump's way. A conviction, honestly, what's the bad outcome next week? Is there a bad outcome? I mean, for Trump, politically, obviously, the betrayal of our justice system, that's terrible. And diminishing faith in our justice system, awful, just awful. But the way I see this going next week is either you get a hung jury or an outright acquittal, which, you know, is going to be, the media is going to once again have to spin to their audience why that happened. Oh, well, and then of course they're going to blame, well, as they always do, it's an idiot juror, some stupid juror who didn't know better. They're going to attack the intelligence of the juror who held out. Or they'll get a conviction in a deep blue district in the country, and the summary is going to be simple. You have a Soros-funded left-wing DA, a Biden Justice Department alum, a ringer, who came in. They were able to secure a Trump conviction inside of a Biden donor's courtroom, inside of one of the bluest districts in the entire United States. And Trump will have been martyred by this time next week. Martyred by these idiots. And it will only lead to more support for the guy. It's crazy. I can just imagine. I can't wait for the James Carville reaction to this. We're going to have to get the audio of that next week. As Carville's raging, the raging Cajun. He'll be raging about that. What is the left doing? This is so stupid. You're only making them more popular. He's going to get elected. Screaming. And if Carville is screaming, that means good things are happening for the country. So we'll be measuring that. So it's like a Richter scale of some kind. You can measure how well the country is doing based on how angry James Carville is about the political wins. It does seem like it's headed that way. I love him complaining about the left, though. They're like, they're too crazy. A man famously crazy. They're too nuts. He thinks it's crazy that Biden is so loyal to the radical elements of his party. I've got Ken calling in from King George. He's on line 4. Ken, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, what's going on, Vince?
I'm good, Ken. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you talking about Carville. So I've actually been to Louisiana, and where we were at, yeah, the only spot that really has people like Carville is New Orleans. They had a mask mandate while I was down there, and it was only in New Orleans. So
yeah, because and New Orleans, of course, is notoriously clean, right? They're neat freaks down there in New Orleans.
Oh yeah.
You can't pick up any diseases in New Orleans. That's what they always tell me.
But when it comes to just anything like foreign policy, when the voice of reason within the Democrat Party is now John Fetterman, the party's in trouble.
Yeah. And they hate him for it. They hate him for it. He keeps coming out and saying common sense things. I don't know who came up with this. I think it was the Babylon Bee that said this. As man recovers brain function, he becomes more conservative. That seems to be happening in Fetterman's case. And I'm right there with you. I find myself nodding along like, oh, wow, Fetterman said the right thing. What is going on in that party if John Fetterman is the voice of reason? You're totally right about that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I just got a text from one of my coworkers. Apparently, he's listening to your show too.
Well, good. Well, let's collectively say hello to your coworker, and thank you very much for the call, Ken. I appreciate that, sir. Yesterday, we were talking about the pine tree flag dating back to George Washington, the American Revolution, and right at the top of the flag, it says an appeal to heaven. It's a wonderful piece of American history. And apparently, the Alito family, Justice Alito, may fly it outside of their beach home, according to a New York Times expose on the subject, which is so ridiculous. They said the insurrectionists were carrying these. you talking about the American Revolution? No. The January 6 people. Okay. They were also carrying American flags. What are you even saying exactly? They don't know what they're saying. But the left is upset about this. Here is Chris Hayes and George Conway complaining on MSNBC about Alito flying a piece of American history.
This is your circle, George. These are your people, man. You spent your whole career around these folks.
These are not his people. They are not his circle.
You keep insulting me like that, I'm going to leave.
But that's true. I mean, it just is a historical, sociological fact.
I can't explain it. I mean, I think there has been this steady deterioration in the sort of the psychological health of a good many people on the right. I mean, why would you? I'm not.
Why would you do it?
Talking about why would you do this?
This is like textbook Marxism. This is when you attack a symbol of American history, invert it on its head, and suggest that it's a sign of your extremism. That's just it. This is just Soviet stuff.
About this is the thing that I find.
Why would you do this?
I find it so fascinating. Like I can imagine. Can you imagine, George? Imagine yourself. Okay, 10 years ago. And you're talking to a young, up-and-coming 45-year-old, 42-year-old, like Federalist Society, really bright Supreme Court clerk, highly pedigreed district court judge. And they're like, I'm going to fly this flag over my house. Like, obviously your advice would be, are you out of your mind? Don't do that. Why would you do that? Right. You're a federal judge. You can't do it, but also don't do it. Why would you do that?
Because it's a piece of American history, you idiot. These people are awful. And speaking of Soviet, Orwellian, on the Wikipedia page for this pine tree flag, they've distorted the history overnight. They've removed all the references to how it was used in history, all of the pop culture references. It was in the John Adams series on HBO. They're deleting that and making it into an extremist symbol as we speak. In case you're looking for an update on the way the left operates, E.J. Antoni's an economist. He'll join us next with the truth about our economy. Good afternoon to you. It is 4:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Kurt Schlichter is here to dance on the grave of an awful left-wing organization that stuck with us for far too long, like a bad disease. And then Lynn Patton is going to be here at 5:30 from the Trump campaign. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. My next guest loves when I play clips from the White House. Here this week is Corinne explaining why you have to pay off the student loan debts of their voters.
Then is the White House's message to those Americans who did not attend college for a variety of reasons, perhaps, including perhaps that they didn't want to take on all the debt that went with it right now, that they feel like in some form they are responsible for allowing those who did not to pay their fair share.
So look, here's the thing. This is a president who has been very clear about making sure that he's building an economy that leaves no one behind, right? Making sure that...
Left behind the ones who didn't get support because they didn't go to college?
I hear your question, but this is, if you look at what the president has done more holistically over the past 3.5 years, he has tried to build an economy for everyone.
That's right. Stealing your money is good for you. More on this now with E.J. Antoni. He's an economist at the Heritage Foundation and the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show. E.J., good to have you with us.
Vince, thanks for having me back. No thanks for making me listen to another one of these lousy clips, but thanks for having me back.
Can explore, if you will, the economic principle underneath what she just said, which is that this makes an economy more fair for everyone if they take money from you.
Well, in a word, I would say the underlying economic principle is theft. This is not a matter of giving someone what they are due, which is the definition of justice. This is a matter of giving someone what will get them to vote for me, which, again, in this case is just theft and nothing more. I mean, you are not owed anything by your fellow man. They do not owe you repayment of your student loans, but that's exactly what this administration is saying justice is in their very warped definition. Somehow an economy that works for everyone punishes those who never went to college, punishes those who paid off their student debt, punishes those who went to college but worked and saved so they didn't have to go into debt in the first place. In other words, all of the people who were responsible get punished.
Yeah, and I feel like an idiot for having paid off my federal student loans a while ago. Still working on those private loans. It's been many years. No relief for me. So who is receiving relief here? As you look at, who's the beneficiary of all of this theft? What's the typical person look like?
Well, ironically, it's not what a lot of people would imagine, which is somebody, let's say, who's working minimum wage. Maybe they have 20, 30, or even 60 or $70,000 in student loan debt. No, it's actually typically people who have professional degrees. So we're talking about not just someone who's got a bachelor's and a master's, but typically they have an even more advanced degree after the master's, and they are oftentimes making six figures. And they are the ones who hold the bulk of this student loan debt. And as a consequence of that, they are getting the most relief. In other words, the people who need it the least are the ones who are going to get the most. That's, as the president would say, that's Bidenomics.
Right, and it's also the opposite of what the left refers to as progressive. That would be regressive, wouldn't it?
Oh, it's highly regressive. But, Vince, so much of what the left says doesn't match what they do. So much of what they do to the tax code, for example, in order to make that more progressive, does exactly the opposite. It makes it regressive. Look at what they want to do with the SALT deduction, for example.
Yeah, let's get into the details here. So I think a lot of people hear that the Trump tax cuts, that's the phrase everyone uses because it's mostly correct. I mean, these are tax cuts, but that the Trump tax cuts will be going away next year unless Washington intervenes. Joe Biden's position is, should he be reelected, he's going to allow those tax cuts to expire, and taxes are going to go up on almost everybody. But as you point out in your research, there's a category of person who's going to get a substantial tax cut when the Trump tax reform expires, and Biden's not telling you about it. Who's getting a tax cut if that happens?
Well, Vince, you're spot on. So the vast majority of Americans will pay higher taxes if Trump's tax reform expires. There's a very small sliver of the population, however, where it will be the opposite. They're going to get a windfall in the millions of dollars. Who is this very small elite group? Well, they are the elite. They're very wealthy people, high income earners, but only in high tax locations. In other words, blue states, places like New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, because the state and local tax deduction that was capped at just $10,000 under President Trump, that would be unlimited, which is what it was before his tax reform. And so instead of only deducting $10,000 from your federal tax bill, you could deduct millions of dollars. That's not an exaggeration. And as a consequence of that, a very high income earner in a place like New York City would actually save 9% of their federal tax liability. Again, that's a windfall measured in the millions of dollars, most of which is simply just going to get funneled right back into the Democrat campaign coffers via donations.
So what that means, as I understand it, is that a truck driver who lives in a red state will end up subsidizing the government expenditures of, say, Warren Buffett's state, New York.
It's exactly right. What the SALT deduction effectively does is cause taxpayers in low tax states, aka red states typically, to pay for wealthy people in blue states, aka the high tax states.
Oh, Warren Buffett lives in Nebraska, I should say that. But I do think of Wall Street when I think of Warren Buffett. But you have rich people living in New York who are going to get subsidies from middle-class people who just got their taxes hiked.
Exactly. That's precisely right, Vince.
Yeah, it's the story they don't tell you when they talk about this. Oh, we're going to raise taxes on rich people. Well, yeah, just rich people who live in responsible states, like red states. All right, let me. I want to move on to another thing that occurred this week that I think is worthy of note, which is that you testified before Congress this week. In fact, you testified before the United States Senate. What was the hearing about?
The hearing was about how evil corporations are gouging consumers, especially regarding food prices, and how the only reason that you're actually paying more at the grocery store is just because all these companies are colluding with each other in order to gouge you and raise prices. So corporate greed is responsible for inflation. Never mind the fact that, we printed trillions of dollars that we didn't have in order to finance all of this government spending that we couldn't afford. That had nothing to do with it, Vince.
All right, so the Democrats organized a buck-passing exercise. They said it's not Biden's fault, it's not our fault, it's these evil corporations. Take a listen. This is an exchange between Senator Elizabeth Warren of, I'm not sure what tribe she's a part of, I forget, but and Dr. E.J. Antoni. Here we go.
So I just got a couple of questions. I want to follow up on where we started out. Dr. Antoni, if I understand
She
you,
thinks it's Anthony. She didn't do her
I
research.
think you're saying that the reason we're seeing high grocery prices is all Joe Biden's fault because he led Congress in the direction, or at least led the Democrats in the direction of doing things like investing in infrastructure and child care and helping us get over the pandemic. Is that kind of a rough statement? You say the model tells you more money must be the reason that grocery prices are up. Is that right?
Partly, Senator, absolutely. Although I wouldn't put all the blame.
Everybody concedes that we got a lot of different points going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I heard you say that that's the reason grocery prices are up so high. Am I wrong? Did I misunderstand you?
It's not just the spending that the president insisted upon. It's the spending that this Congress
I'm willing to put Congress in there. So it's what we have done.
I love this. As soon as she started asking the question, I knew. I was like, he's not going to let her slide. You're also to blame, aren't you, Elizabeth Warren? I'm glad you caught her on that.
Oh, exactly. And, she, of course, talks about how, this spending was for the children, right? It's for things like child care and building roads and bridges. So I went back and looked, Vince, less than 1% of the spending under Biden has gone to roads and bridges. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. And that's even after the fact that they passed a so-called infrastructure bill that was over $1 trillion. There's literally more money in that bill to destroy existing roadways than build new ones.
You know, what's funny about Elizabeth Warren in particular is, and this is clearly a sign that she's just a creature of left-wing power, obviously. But earlier in her career, she had written this book. I think it was called The Two-Income Trap. And the idea was that if you have multiple income earners in a single household, as so many households do now, it leads to this kind of like a race for goods. Like goods are more expensive now. There's an inflationary impact to having two incomes in every household. And as a result, it's harder to have a single income household in America now. So she understood the basic economic principles at some point earlier in her career. Now that's all gone out the window. Now she's like, what? I don't even understand what you're saying, E.J. Antoni.
No, Vince, you're absolutely right. She actually makes several good points in that book, but unfortunately, as you said, she has completely abandoned any economic principles or any economic understanding whatsoever. She knows about as much on economics than I would say AOC. That might be generous, but anyway, the point is that at the end of the day, that's a really, really important thing to understand, that if you're going to strongly encourage every woman to go to work instead of staying home and raising her children, then you are going to drastically increase the labor supply by roughly doubling it. And that is going to have the effect of pushing down wage growth. There's no doubt about that. I mean, You can argue for other reasons that women should be in the workforce, and that's fine. You can have that, you can make that case, but it's indisputable that a doubling of the labor supply is going to put downward pressure on wage growth.
Right. So I'll play a little bit more from Elizabeth Warren's exchange with you earlier this week. Take a listen.
For example, like building roads and bridges and childcare and so on. So I just want to be clear about this. Does that mean that the CEO of Hershey's, when the Hershey's executive goes on the earnings call, that he was lying when he said that actually they were able, I think, to more than offset inflation and higher manufacturing and overhead costs? In other words, it's what I call price gouging. They didn't just pass along costs. They larded a whole lot more on top of that, and that's why Hershey's was producing great for its investors. Was he lying? Should he have just said, look, I'm just passing along what that Democratic Congress and that Democratic president did?
Senator, the comments you're referring to are not simply passing along current cost increases, but also passing along previous cost increases.
No, that is not what he says. He says that our pricing more than offset inflation and higher manufacturing and overhead costs. And I'm asking you, was he lying?
Again, Senator,
This is not just price increases that are happening today, but that happened yesterday as well. This is why, if you look at figure 14 in my written testimony, you can clearly see that the prices paid by businesses like Hershey's spike before the prices paid by consumers.
He clearly states he is not passing along costs.
I'm struggling to follow her argument. Is her argument that Hershey should not focus on turning a profit at all? Is that what she's saying?
Well, exactly, because again, chocolate at the end of the day, Vince, is for the children, right? This business is not about earning a profit. This is about providing candy for kids at the end of the day. I mean, who could be against that? The point that
but if a CEO, but if a CEO says in an earnings call that, yeah, we were able to cover the increased costs of inflation, and yes, we were still able to earn a profit, isn't that what you're supposed to do as a company? She made it seem like it was some great sin that he said that.
No, you're absolutely right. But what was essentially happening there was the fact that Hershey's, although they were not able initially to keep up their prices with their own rising costs, they eventually were. And finally, they were able to not only make up for current price increases, but the price increases that had happened from months or even years ago. And that's why you saw prices go up for businesses much sooner than you did for consumers. In fact, it has only been just within the last couple of months that prices paid by consumers have finally caught up to prices paid by businesses.
Yeah,
and these aren't like my numbers, my calculations. These are numbers from the Biden administration.
Right. And so there's been this false claim out there, supported by, of course, the Democrats in Congress and certainly their media water carriers, that everything we're seeing is the product of greedy corporations. They just decided all together, collectively, they're going to spike prices on everything to make our lives miserable and wring every last dollar out of us. And that's not, in fact, the case at all. They are quite literally covering their costs. And for that matter, throughout much of this, you and I have talked about this before, many of these companies have actually tried to insulate consumers from the price increases.
That's exactly right. And, if they don't do that, then they have to risk losing market share. And in much of the food industry, you're talking about pretty thin margins. And so as you start to lose market share, that can have a pretty devastating effect on your profitability. In other words, losing, let's say, 5 or 10% of market share may cause much more than a 5 or 10% hit to your bottom line. And so everyone has been pretty reluctant to increase prices. One of the figures that I pointed out was the fact that within the food industry, profits today are actually lower after you adjust for inflation than they were right before Biden took office. So this whole idea that somehow the food industry is gouging consumers, please explain to me then why they're making less money in real terms. And what's interesting, Vince, is the fact that how much more they are making, that percentage increase in nominal terms almost exactly matches how much the average American worker is making today versus January of 2021. In other words, it's like a 14% increase, except both have fallen in inflation adjusted terms by about 4 or 5%. In other words, everyone is in the same boat. We are all poorer, consumers and businesses alike, because of the hidden tax of inflation. All of our incomes are going up by roughly the same amount, but what they can buy are all going down by roughly the same amount.
Yeah, well, so simple. Even Elizabeth Warren can understand it. E.J. Antoni, thank you, sir, always for your commentary, your thoughts, your expertise, and have a happy Memorial Day weekend. Thank you, sir.
You too, Vince. Thank you.
President Trump said last night during his rally in the Bronx, apparently Joe Biden's campaign has asked that the first debate be seated. Trump wanted to stand. Biden doesn't have the stamina for that, so they're going to keep him seated. Nate Silver's a pollster, and he's been talking about what this debate news all means for Biden, and it's not good for the left. Take a listen.
How do I put this nicely?
You don't have to put it nicely, Nate.
I think we're more qualified.
We're among friends here.
Last week, Biden does a tape segment on Morning Joe saying, "I challenge you, Donald, to not one, but 2 debates." Half an hour later, his campaign puts out a memo, which does confirm that he has challenged Trump to 2 debates, and also says in the third paragraph, by the way, we are actually pulling out of the Commission on Presidential Debates the 3 debates that they had planned for later this year. But basically, Biden traded 3 debates after Labor Day, for 1 debate after Labor Day, and then one on CNN, the cable network, that will happen in the middle of June, that probably everyone will forget about by the time the conventions happen in July and August, and certainly by the time we get to the stretch run of the campaign. Usually when you are behind in an election, and Biden is behind right now in the very large majority of swing state polls, you want more uncertainty. You want more variance, meaning that you should want more debates because they add volatility to the election, and instead, Biden wants fewer. That, to me, is a really, 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 really bad sign for his campaign.
He says if Biden is still struggling in August, he probably should step aside, he says. The left in an all-out panic about the state of their race, which is good for the rest of us. We'll see what happens. Coming up, we'll be joined by Kurt Schlichter and Lynn Patton from the Trump campaign. Stay with us.